Welcome to the Darkstream. VoxDay, voxday.blogspot.com, and Infogalactic News. Now, we've been having a discussion at the blog, that's Vox Populi, recently, and we've been talking about the baby boomers. And we've been talking about how the various generations feel about them, how the effect of their generational cohort on the United States, and that sort of thing. Some of you have just popped up in the comments. I should probably mention this. Stefan and his producer finally posted the much-awaited conversation about Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. And so if you're interested, it's up on YouTube. I've got a link to it on the blog, so you can find it. So if you want to see two middle-aged bald men talk about a Russian novel, it's a pretty obscure form of porn, but it's out there. Anyhow, so now here's the thing. Before those of you who are baby boomers do the usual baby boomer thing and start talking about how you're not like all the other baby boomers and that sort of thing. Look, we know that, okay? When we are talking about a generation, we are talking about the collective, the group. That means there are always going to be departures from the norm, okay? I understand that. I am an American Indian. I don't get upset when people point out that the average American Indian IQ is 87. Why would that offend me? All it means is that instead of being, plus 4 SD, I'm plus 5 SD. It's kind of cool. No big deal. So the point is that there's no point. Don't be solipsistic. Don't be self-centered. Don't think that this is being aimed at you personally. It's not. And in fact, it's a little ironic because, when people get offended by this, then they tend to prove the point that their generation is very, very different than mine or than some of the other generation, than the two generations that follow. So here's the thing. I am of the generation called Generation X. We were also known originally as the baby bust. Why? Because so many of us were aborted. We were the first generation to be significantly reduced by abortion. Furthermore, we also were raised very, very differently. So now, but here's the thing that kind of separates our perspective from the generations to follow. What separates us from the millennials and the Generation Z. One of the big things that separates us is the fact that we still remember what white Anglo-Saxon Protestant 1950s Norman Rockwell America was like. We grew up in a beautiful America. That America was not built by the boomers, and in fact, it was, to a certain extent, destroyed by them. Now, it's not entirely fair to blame them. It was not the boomers that ran the 1965 Naturalization Act through that destroyed America. That was the greatest generation and the silence. Okay? What was it like? In retrospect, it was incredibly idyllic. In retrospect, the problems that we had were so trivial and so minor compared to the challenges that are facing kids today. Now, we did have some things that were unusual. The two things that were unusual for us were the latchkey kid phenomenon. Because women started going out to work, a lot of women had already worked. A third of all women always worked. The working class worked. What was different, what changed, starting in towards the end of the 1950s, was that feminism was created, and the type of middle class women who had historically gotten married and had children instead went to work, whether they had kids or not. Now, I'm not saying that everything was, peachy keen. Yes, there was. I mean, the Iranian hostage. It's funny they bring up now the Iranian hostage situation like it was a big deal. It wasn't a big deal. It had, yes, it was in the news every night for a year and a half, but it didn't actually make any difference to anyone at all, except for maybe a few people who were related to people over there. The gas lines were difficult, yes, but so what? What's really remarkable is watch a movie from the 80s. Watch something like, one of those movies like Footloose or something. And when you watch it, you see these kids talking about how they want to get out of this boring town and boring life and all that sort of thing. And it looks like paradise. You've got a bunch of, slender, attractive white people, and apparently they're just bored because everything is so is too wonderful, and it's not exciting enough. Well, guess what? We got excitement now, baby. And so the it was much easier in the sense that when I was in first grade, I walked over a mile to school every day, mile and a half. It was not considered a problem. It was, we would go out and on Saturdays and stuff, we would go out and, have acorn wars in the forests and just, run around and bike around and do sort of things. I mean, in retrospect, it's kind of hard. It's kind of bizarre now to see the way that you go to neighborhoods. You drive into a suburban neighborhood in the United States and you don't see anyone outside. I mean, when I was growing up, that's probably the one thing that I noticed more than anything else is that when I was growing up, we were always outside playing basketball. The rich family down the street actually had a tennis court that they allowed everybody in the neighborhood to use. I can remember I would go down there with a girl who was about 2 years younger, and we would just hit the ball back and forth and talk for hours. And nobody paid any attention. I mean, this house was all the way down the street. It's nearly half a mile away. And it never even occurred to anyone to pay any attention to where we were, and there were never any problems. There were, it was a homogeneous society. It was a unexciting society. It was it was a less wealthy society in a number of ways. For example, people didn't have so many cars. You didn't lease your cars, and so people did not have. They didn't all have new cars, but most of the families had 2 cars. If you were lucky, when you turned 16, your parents might get you an old beater or something, and you would be so psyched about that. All your money would go. Forget. Yeah, you never go out to dinner. I can remember. I knew my father's company was doing really well. I didn't realize how wealthy it had gotten, but I knew something had changed when we started going out to dinner on Friday nights. I mean, this was incredible. It was very, very it was very, very strange that way. And so, this is the world that we have lost. And this is something that Gen X is very, very bitter, and I think to a certain extent angry about. And so, when I look at how different things are for our children, for me it's very different because we live in Europe rather than in the States. But, I'm in touch with my friends. I know some of the issues that they have to deal with now. And you see the changes, and it is almost unthinkable. The sense of community is significantly reduced. I was talking to, because I can remember I used to love to go to the Dales. Minnesota was a pioneer in the whole shopping mall thing because it's freezing cold there for 4 or 5 months out of the year. And it was always really fun when you were young getting to go to Rosedale or Southdale and that sort of thing. Well, nowadays people don't even go to the Mall of America in Minnesota much anymore, because when they go, they find that they're the only white people there. It's being completely overrun by mostly teenage Africans. It's not entirely safe. It is not something that people it's not what they grew up with. It's not what they want, and it's not what they lobbied for. Now, it's not like the boomers all decided, hey, we want this is what we want. The problem is simply that the boomers failed to pass on tradition. The boomers failed to first they failed to pass on the Christian religion that they were raised in themselves. Many of them had the forms, but they didn't have the spirit. Secondly, what I noticed more than anything else when I was in my early 20s is that the women in particular did not teach and did not invest any time in teaching their daughters how to be homemakers. They did not teach, instead of encouraging them to become wives and mothers, they encouraged them to get a degree and get a good job. And what was really astonishing, I'm thinking of a friend of my the wife of my one of my best friends. She had to work her ass off because she realized that when she was getting to the point where it was pretty obvious that she was going to get married, she suddenly realized that she didn't know how to cook. she didn't know how to do any of this stuff. And, to her credit, she went to her grandmother and just said, Grandma, teach me this stuff. And, her grandmother was kind of appalled that her daughter hadn't taught her anything. And so, that's something that we do with our kids, is that all of them, one night a week, the kids handle dinner. They plan it, they make it, they do everything. And, one of my issues, in terms of not gaining too much weight, is that they're always experimenting with, baking stuff and making cookies and, Father's Day is coming up. It's like, Daddy, you still haven't redeemed your coupon for lasagna from Christmas. But that's how you pass on those traditions. And I say this, how you pass on, like I had anything to do with this. That's all my wife. My idea of cooking is, do you want cereal or do you want me to open a can of tuna? Because that's about it. But yeah, so, and it's more than just cooking. It's also, sewing and knitting and, all those various things. And what's really interesting is that when you see a young girl now out in public and they pull their their knitting or whatever, you should see how the old women just are so excited to see that someone is still doing this kind of stuff. And so it's important. It's important to understand that all of these little things are what go into making up a society that is worth living. And a number of you have mentioned divorce. Of course, that's huge. And this is something that a lot of you probably wouldn't recognize, but we did not, our generation barely knew what divorce was. I can remember for the first time that I became aware of it, I think I was in, I must have been about 10. Because one year, a girl named Kathy, in between 4th and 5th grade, a girl named Kathy left school with one name and came back with another name. And apparently her parents had gotten divorced, and so her mother went back to her maiden name or something like that. I don't recall exactly what it was, but the point is that with all the kids in the school and that sort of thing, there was only one child of divorce. Now it's a little bit ironic. I guess I'm technically a child of divorce now, but my parents got divorced when I was, I think, in my 40s, and I was so out of tune with that I didn't even know about it for like 18 months. So I can't really say that I'm deeply scarred by it. But back in the day, divorce was far less common. Now, you see more. You just kept seeing more and more and more and more of it. Condolences. Really, it's okay. Anyhow, you have to keep in mind, I live on an entirely different continent than most of my family, so it's not really it's not the same kind of thing. Anyhow, let's get rid of this nonsense. So anyhow, what I'm trying to, and so then we also talked to the millennials and the Generation Z. And what was interesting is that the millennials don't have the same anger that that Generation X does, and I think it's because they can't remember it. I think it's because they don't know what they've lost. I think it's because they don't realize how much things have changed. But what's interesting to me is that they simply don't know the baby boomers. They don't know their grandparents in the same way that we knew ours. You know, I mean, I was closer to my maternal grandparents than anyone else in my entire extended family. You know, I mean, if there were two people that I could, you know, have the opportunity of all the people that I've known that have died, if there were two people that I could just spend, you know, half an hour with, it would be them. You know, I miss them to this day. Because they invested so much time in me. You know, I can remember in college, I would actually, you know, I went to college about 3 hours drive away from my grandparents in Alexandria. I went to university in Pennsylvania, and you know, I always really enjoyed whenever we had a long weekend or whatever. I would usually drive down and just, we didn't do anything. I would just drive down, we would hang out, we'd maybe go out to dinner one night. My grandmother would make cookies for me one day. You know, and often some of my friends would come along with me or so forth. And, you know, I think it is tragic, absolutely tragic, that so many millennials and Generation Z kids simply don't have that kind of relationship with the grandparents. I mean, I was kind of shocked when, you know, I was like in my 30s or something, and my grandmother had already died. Actually, both of them had already died. And I remember my dad talking about what a pain in the ass my grandmother could be. And I was legitimately shocked. I mean, to me, she was practically the perfect, just the perfect woman. She was so cool. You know, I remember we had a party, and you know, this is back, Psychosonic was gone, so there was all kinds of people there. There were, you know, people from the music scene. There were people, you know, a bunch of models and all that kind of stuff. And I remember there's this swimsuit model who's really hot, and she came up to me and she's like, "Oh my gosh, I cannot believe how cool your mother is. I mean, she's just like the coolest woman." I was like, "My mother? What's she doing here?" And she points over, and you know, there's my grandmother. She's dressed in all black. She's got these, like, you know, black leather boots that come up to her knees, and she just looked really, I mean, she looked totally appropriate there, and I mean, she totally fit in. And I said, "Yeah, that's not my mother. That's my grandmother." And she's like, and this girl said, "You know, I hope that when I get that age, I'm half that cool." You know, because that was just the, you know, I remember my grandfather, he came up to my university to visit, and you know, I was not in a fraternity, but there was a fraternity that my 3 best friends all belonged to, and so, you know, I was on the track team. We were kind of discouraged from pledging fraternities because we were always, you know, training all year. So, but anyhow, I had the friends there, so he had come up for they'd come up to visit for some reason, and we went to this fraternity, and I had a lot of good friends there, but there's some other guys there who weren't terribly fond of me. So I was kind of interested to see. I was kind of hoping that people would be cool and whatnot. And anyhow, so these guys come in, And there's like a whole bunch of people there. Like we're talking about 100, 150 people there. And my grandfather comes in and he's wearing a Bucknell track jacket. And so, people are kind of like commenting on that and whatnot. And some fraternity brothers came up and brought us beers. And my grandfather just holds his beer up for a second. And everyone just and you got to keep in mind, he was a lieutenant colonel of Marines. So he's got this voice that he can project with. And he holds up his can of beer. And you have to understand, Bucknell's football team was pretty bad. I mean, not Columbia bad, but very bad. And they had lost at the football game. They had lost earlier that day. And so he holds up, and everyone just kind of like quiets down because he's like the only guy who's within 25 years of his age. He says, to Bucknell, never won a football game, never lost a party. And everyone just roared with approval. And I mean, what kind of 60-something-year-old guy can just walk into a fraternity to which his grandson doesn't even belong and just own the place? I mean, he was much more popular than I was by the time we left. And so, it's how do you not miss being around people like that? But that's the kind of relationship that the baby boomers threw away. I mean, I talked to some of my friends, and they find it hard. They find it very difficult to get their grandparents, to even babysit their kids. And so, the question is, what can we do about that? We can recreate some of that, but those of us who remember it need to talk about it. We need to teach the younger generations what it was. And I mean, I'm probably not the right example for this kind of thing. I mean, my family is probably considerably more fractured than most. But that doesn't mean that I have to raise my kids the way that our parents raised us. I mean, I'm not complaining. I'm not complaining. But I cannot remember my dad ever throwing the football, kicking the ball, shooting hoops, doing any of that stuff with me or any of my brothers. He was always busy. He was always working. He was working hard. But, it was difficult to have a much of a personal relationship with him. Now, I was lucky. My dad was very, he was interested in my activities. So, he and my mom, I don't think they ever missed any of our soccer games. And my dad was also at all my track meets. That was a bit of a mixed blessing. He had this theory, you see, that if you ran distances in the winter, it would make you faster in the spring season. I was a 100-meter sprinter, and he had me running 6 miles in the morning before I went to school in January in Minnesota. So it was, I mean, in retrospect, that sounds like borderline child abuse. I mean, we're talking 20 below zero. And you got to run 6 miles. It sucked. On the other hand, you were very awake by the time you got back. So, and also I can remember, like, what my mother was working my dad's company. She used to pick my poor little brothers up when they were after school in elementary school, and then they would have to sit there at the office and entertain themselves. just so she could sit there and pretend to have a job. She didn't need a job, you know. No, the theory did not work at all. I mean, yes, my speed did go well, but not any better than you would have expected. So, anyhow, you know, so maybe that's what we need to do. Maybe what we in Generation X need to do is we need to talk to you guys, and we need to let you know what things were like, so that you don't have to be afraid of doing things the way that were done to you. You know, now maybe Gen X does make some mistakes. Maybe we do helicopter too much. Maybe we do pay our kids too much attention. You know, that's possible. But I can tell you that it is better to have a positive relationship with your kids, and you know, maybe to pay them too much attention than to be too indifferent to them. You know, I mean, for me, you know, one of the great privileges for me has been having the chance to play soccer with my son. You know, we actually got, he was kind of annoyed. We didn't actually get on the field at the same time, but, you know, he got bumped up, he got called up by the first team when they needed an extra player, and I was driving them there, and the players knew me, so they said, hey, why don't you suit up and play with us too? And so we both ended up playing for his club's first team in the same game, although unfortunately he got subbed out. I actually got subbed in for him, which was a little ironic. But the thing is, it was a great experience. It was really cool. And so, you know, and we actually played together this winter. I practiced with his team probably 10 or 12 times. So, you know, and actually what you're talking about, a compilation of stories of what it was like to live in America as a Gen Xer. I'm a publisher. We're going to do this. We're going to do a book called Growing Up Gen X, and we're going to publish it. And, you know, if you're a writer, and if you've got a good story, write it and send it to me. You know, write it and send it to me. We will pick out the best of them, and then we'll publish it. Yeah, this is a general call for people who grew up Gen X to tell a story, a significant story, about the world that we lost. So, what the hell, I mean, yeah, the UK is fine. We'll do a separate one. We'll do one for the US. We'll do one for the UK. Maybe if we can get enough stories from the UK. No, this is nonfiction. I mean, by definition, we are talking about real life. What really happened, what you did and what you experienced and what was meaningful to you and why it doesn't exist anymore. We don't even need to get into the why. Just, I mean, if they're not great writers, then it's probably not going to make the cut. You know, we'll see how many we get. I don't know. Don't just bombard me with email right away. I'll put it up on the blog, and we'll figure something out. I'll probably get a volunteer editor who can handle this, who's the right age. So, I would say anywhere between 1,500 and 7,500 words, something like that. So, anyhow, you know, the thing is that which has been built before can be built again. You know, it may not be the same. It may not be the same, but it is not something that is unattainable. And in answer, no, I don't want millennials to write in this one. Maybe we actually, if this works out well, if this is popular, we'll do a millennial one too. And then, of course, if I had more time, I would I would write something, because we need to write a book. We need to write the definitive book on what the baby boomers did to America. That's something that I want. I don't want to just publish it. I want to write that. So, anyhow, no, there's not going to be any boomer stories. Gen X is 1965. I don't know when it ends exactly. So, anyhow, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for stopping by. If you're interested in the crime and punishment discussion, there's a link on the blog. And if you're a writer, take a look at the blog, and I'll have some notes up on what we're looking for on the Generation X books. So, have a good evening, and we'll talk to you soon.